Have you ever had, like, a truly great idea at work? Something that just seems so obviously beneficial, so undeniably clear, and then you bring it to the table and
And you just have to watch it slowly suffocate in a committee meeting?
yes, exactly. The slow, quiet death of a good idea by 1,000 administrative paper cuts.
It's a universally understood frustration, really, in almost any large organization, but especially in higher education.
Right, and that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to today's Deep Dive. Our mission for you listening is to unpack this fascinating set of notes we have based on a piece called Innovation versus Infrastructure: Why Good Ideas Stall in Colleges.
It's a great piece.
It really is. We're going to figure out exactly why this bureaucratic suffocation happens, what colleges could actually be doing to boost innovation, and, to be fair to the institutions, why we have to respect the very real guardrails they have in place.
Yeah, and to really unpack this, we aren't just going to look at, technology policy.
Right.
We are looking at the intersection of human behavior, organizational psychology, and institutional structure. Because if you want to understand how to actually make change happen or why it stalls out, you have to look at the systems that dictate how people behave within them.
Okay, so let's start with how innovation is actually supposed to work before it gets broken by those systems. Because the materials we're looking at highlight a fundamental rule, which is that adoption starts with practice, not policy.
Exactly. No one innovates by writing a rule book first.
Right.
To really grasp this mechanism, our notes pull from the work of Everett Rogers. For anyone who might need a quick refresher, Rogers wrote this monumental book back in the 1960s called Diffusion of Innovations.
Oh, yeah, the foundational text.
It really is. It's essentially the bedrock for understanding how ideas move through a population. And his core finding was, well, it was a massive reality check. He found that new ideas do not spread evenly, and they absolutely do not spread automatically just because they're, quote unquote, good.
Which is wild, because I always used to think it was like a build it and they will come situation. Like if I invent a better mousetrap, the world beats a path to my door.
Right. That is probably the most common misconception out there.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Rogers found that people adopt new things based on a very specific psychological calculus. First, they look for relative advantage.
Meaning the value just has to be undeniable.
Right. But more importantly, for our discussion today, they require two specific things: trialability and observability.
Trialability and observability.
Yeah. And conversely, if an idea introduces too much complexity or uncertainty, adoption just hits a brick wall.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Rogers' concepts are incredibly applicable to how you and I live our everyday lives. Think about his ideas of trialability and observability like buying a brand new electric vehicle when you've only ever driven gas cars.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Right, because you don't sit down at the dealership and ask to read the manufacturer's compliance manual or the lithium-ion battery schematics to decide if you want to buy the thing.
I mean, you would be asleep in 5 minutes.
Exactly. Or you just walk out of sheer intimidation. You want to take it for a low-risk test drive. You want to see how it accelerates on the highway without actually committing to a $50,000 loan today.
And that's trialability.
Right. And beyond that, you are heavily influenced by observability. Seeing your neighbor pull into their driveway with an EV, hearing them talk over the fence about how they haven't been to a gas station in 3 months.
Yep. You see it working for someone else first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the innovators on college campuses instinctively get this. They don't start by drafting a massive campus-wide policy or a 70-page proposal.
No, they test ideas in real, actual classrooms. They make their work visible to the professor down the hall.
Right.
They say, hey, I tried this new grading software for just one assignment. Come see how it saved me 2 hours this weekend. They reduce the complexity, and they eliminate the uncertainty for their peers.
To give them that test drive.
Exactly. They offer the test drive.
So, okay, if low-risk testing is the secret engine of human innovation, why on earth do large institutions make it so incredibly difficult to do just that? I mean, sometimes it feels like they actively design systems to prevent the test drive.
Well, let's play devil's advocate for the institutions here for a second. We have to acknowledge that colleges aren't just putting up red tape for the sheer joy of being difficult.
Fair enough.
They carry massive, heavy responsibilities.
I hear that, but come on. When I hear responsibilities, I usually translate that directly to protecting the college from a lawsuit?
Well, sure, liability is a huge part of it, but think about what that liability actually represents in this context. We are talking about protecting highly sensitive student privacy data.
Sure.
We are talking about strict accessibility standards. Ensuring that a shiny new tech tool doesn't accidentally exclude students with visual or hearing impairments.
Oh, right, that's critical.
And we are talking about maintaining accreditation, which is quite literally the lifeblood of the institution. If they lose that, students can't get federal financial aid.
Wow, okay, so I guess the stakes actually are incredibly high. Like, an enthusiastic professor just downloading some random app to run a class quiz might accidentally be giving a third-party company access to student grades without even realizing it.
That is the exact nightmare scenario IT departments lose sleep over. So systems like the Office of Information Technology, compliance offices, institutional governance structures, they have to exist.
Right, they aren't just there to be mean.
Exactly. The issue isn't that these systems are inherently bad. In fact, solid guardrails that allow for safe experimentation actually support innovation because they remove the risk of something catastrophic happening.
But the reality on the ground feels so different from that ideal. The notes we're looking at describe a massive disconnect between those protective guardrails and actual progress.
And what's fascinating here is that this brings us straight to John Kotter's research on organizational change.
Oh, Kotter.
Right. Kotter is a massive figure in change management, best known for his book, Leading Change. And he observes something really interesting about large bureaucracies. He says they don't fail because they implement processes. They fail when the people inside those organizations allow the processes to overtake the purpose.
Basically, when the bureaucracy stops serving the goal and starts serving itself.
Exactly. Just consider the psychology of someone sitting on a compliance committee. Their job is explicitly to find flaws, to mitigate risk.
All right, they are paid to say, what if?
Yeah. And over time, basic self-preservation kicks in. The safest career move for a committee member is always to say no, or to just ask for another 6 months of study. Nobody ever gets fired for delaying a software rollout.
But they definitely get fired if they approve software that causes a massive data breach.
Well, 100%.
Which leads to a really specific danger zone highlighted in our source material. It's the moment when risk management secretly morphs into risk avoidance.
Yes, that shift is deadly.
Right. The central question of the committee entirely shifts. It goes from asking, does this new idea actually improve student learning? To, does this meet every single procedural requirement we can possibly dream up before we even allow one person to test it?
And if we look back at Everett Rogers' model from earlier, we know exactly what happens next. That hyper-focus on procedure introduces massive complexity.
It totally destroys trialability.
Exactly. Adoption just grinds to a halt.
And it creates this completely absurd reality on campuses. Like, the text paints a picture of a formal committee sitting in a room, studying a new piece of software for 6 months, debating its theoretical merits, doing all these endless thread assessments. Meanwhile, down the hall, half the faculty have already been informally using a free version of that exact same software in their classrooms for a whole semester.
Right.
The committee isn't protecting anyone at that point. They are just artificially delaying the alignment between what is already happening in reality and what the college officially supports.
And that lag between formal policy and informal practice is the textbook definition of process overtaking purpose. But, we can't just lay all the blame on slow-moving committees. Let's look at the people on the front lines, the faculty.
Okay, let's talk about the faculty.
Because the obvious question here is, if a professor knows a tool is great and they know the committee is going to take a year to approve it, why don't they just push past the red tape and use it anyway?
Yeah. Be the Maverick teacher from the movies. Stand on the desks and disrupt the system.
Right, the movie Maverick. But the problem with that is that the actual college classroom is fundamentally not a low-stakes environment.
And this is such a critical point for you listening. When administrators or tech companies tell a professor to just experiment or disrupt things, they're completely ignoring the reality of the room.
They really are.
Asking a teacher to experiment without giving them institutional support isn't innovation at all.
Yeah.
It's just shifting the risk entirely onto their shoulders.
Exactly. Think about what is actually on the line in that 50-minute lecture. It's not just an ego trip for the professor. It's students' grades. It's their academic progression.
Right.
In many cases, an international student's visa status depends entirely on what happens in that specific course. So if the experimental tech fails and ruins a final exam, the consequences are severe.
Wow. Yeah. So how do colleges actually support these folks so they feel safe enough to take a risk in that environment?
Well, our source material brings in 3 heavy hitters to explain the human element of adoption here. First, there's Edward Deci and Richard Ryan.
The motivation researchers.
Yes. They are essentially the founding fathers of modern motivation research, specifically looking at intrinsic motivation. And their work proves that autonomy, competence, and a sense of purpose are what drive people to do great things.
Because people genuinely want to do good work.
Right.
Like teachers want to be effective educators.
They absolutely do. But Deci and Ryan's framework also implies that in a professional setting, you can't just rely on intrinsic motivation alone while you are actively crushing people with external pressures.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You cannot ignore workload, incentives, and trust. You can't demand a professor redesign their entire course using some untested platform while simultaneously doubling their student load and offering 0 structural support.
That's just a recipe for burnout, not innovation.
Exactly. Which leads us to the second researcher, Dean Fixon. Fixon's work focuses on implementation science, basically, how we actually get people to use new methods. And he completely dismantles the way organizations usually do professional training.
Oh, you mean the mandatory Friday afternoon professional development seminar in a sterile conference room?
Yeah, those are practically useless for long-term adoption. Fixon found that initial training just doesn't translate into sustained practice without something very specific.
Okay.
Support at the moment of use.
Okay, walk me through what that actually looks like in practice, because that sounds crucial.
It is. Imagine a professor standing in front of a lecture hall of 200 students. They decide to take a risk and use a new interactive digital polling tool to boost engagement. Right.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
5 minutes in, the campus network drops, or the software just crashes. The students start talking, looking at their phones. The professor loses control of the room.
Yeah.
In that exact moment, they are incredibly vulnerable.
Oh, totally. It's a nightmare.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't need an IT seminar next Tuesday. They need an immediate, responsive lifeline right then and there to fix the problem. If that point of need support isn't there, they will abandon the tool forever and just go back to a traditional whiteboard.
Wait, here's where it gets really interesting, because that completely flips the script on a stereotype we're all so familiar with. We always hear about the stubborn, tech-phobic professor who just refuses to get with the times.
Yeah, the dinosaur trope.
Right. We blame the teacher. But if you look at Fixon's research, you realize that resistance isn't stubbornness at all. It is literally just survival. We are handing them an untested tool, asking them to risk their credibility in front of a live audience, and offering absolutely no safety net when it crashes. We've basically just humiliated them in front of their students, so of course they resist. It's self-preservation. Why would they risk looking incompetent for a tool the college barely supports?
It is a deeply rational response to an unsupported environment, and it highlights a threat to their professional identity, which brings us to the third researcher mentioned in the notes, Tony Bates.
Okay, tell me, Bates.
In his work, Teaching in a Digital Age, Bates argues something that honestly tech companies absolutely hate to hear. He says technology never, ever improves learning on its own.
It's not a magic bullet that fixes bad pedagogy.
Never. It is only effective when it is intentionally integrated with clear instructional goals. Simply buying a massive enterprise license for a new platform and dropping it onto a campus achieves absolutely nothing.
You can't just parachute it in.
Right. Faculty need time, space, and pedagogical support to redesign their teaching in a way that actually makes sense for their specific subject and their specific students. The tech has to serve the teaching, not the other way around.
Okay, let's zoom out for a second and look at the puzzle we've put together here. Because we know from Rogers that we need low-risk trialability.
Yes.
We know from Cotter that bureaucracies tend to strangle that trialability to avoid risk.
Right.
And we know from Fixon and Bates that faculty need intense point-of-view support and careful integration to actually adopt anything new. So how do institutions bridge this massive gap without exposing themselves to ruin?
Well, they have to start by avoiding the most common error large organizations make. Our notes identify this as the trap of premature scaling.
Premature scaling.
Yeah.
Meaning treating every single idea like it has to be huge from day one.
Exactly.
It's like deciding you want to open a nationwide restaurant franchise with 500 locations before you've even finalized the recipe for the signature burger in your home kitchen.
That is a perfect way to look at it. There is an inherent tension here that colleges face. Supporting an innovation at full scale, say, rolling out a brand new learning management system across an entire university that requires massive infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
It takes staffing, ongoing training, integration with existing tech, continuous maintenance. Those are the legitimate constraints we talked about earlier.
Right. You can't just wing a campus-wide rollout.
Yeah.
It takes serious engineering and funding.
But the fatal error is treating every single new idea as if it must instantly meet the criteria for a university-wide rollout.
Ah, I see.
When a committee demands that a tiny pilot program for 20 students have the exact same security infrastructure, scalability, and long-term funding plan as a campus-wide platform, they crush the idea before it even breathes. You prevent the tiny, contained, safe experiments that are needed to gather the evidence in the first place.
You completely choke out the trial ability. You're forcing them to build the 500 restaurants just to taste the burger.
Exactly. And the irony is, the very bureaucratic structures designed to ensure consistency and quality end up unintentionally preventing the experimentation that leads to those effective, scalable practices.
Man, this ties back so beautifully to the cultural alignment piece we were talking about with faculty identity. Rogers has this concept of compatibility innovations spread easily when they align with the existing values of the people using them.
Yes, compatibility is huge.
Right. So when a college introduces a piece of technology and frames it, even accidentally, as an efficiency tool meant to replace faculty work or just standardize everything, adoption plummets.
Because it threatens their identity.
Exactly. It threatens their identity as educators. But when it is framed as a tool to enhance their teaching, and they are given the autonomy to test at small scale, adoption soars.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we are watching this exact dynamic play out in real time right now with the current explosion of artificial intelligence.
Oh, absolutely. AI is the ultimate stress test for every single thing we're talking about today.
Our source text applies these historical lessons directly to the AI landscape. Think about it. AI innovation is already happening. It is moving at lightning speed. And crucially, it is largely happening outside of formal campus systems.
Right. Students are using it for research. Faculty are quietly using it to draft syllabi or generate quiz questions. It's happening whether the committee meets or not.
Exactly. So the institution's job right now is not to force a massive, full-scale, locked-down AI solution across all departments immediately.
Because if they try to do that, they'll form a committee, studied it for 3 years, and by the time they release the policy, the AI model they approved will be like 6 generations obsolete.
Without a doubt, their job is to manage the organic spread. They need to create conditions where successful, low-risk, small-scale AI use becomes visible.
Make it observable.
Yes. They need to provide that point of view support for those early adopters, reduce unnecessary complexity, and keep those essential guardrails like data privacy intact without demanding premature scaling. Yes, scaling those practices will require intentional infrastructure eventually, but demanding a full-scale solution before allowing small-scale testing just guarantees failure.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Whether you're navigating a college campus, a corporate office, or just trying to drive change in any complex organization, let's synthesize these core takeaways.
Let's do it.
If an institution wants to actually enhance innovation, they have to deliberately engineer conditions for it. They must allow low-risk trialability so people can test drive the car.
Right.
They must make success observable so peers can see the benefits. And they must provide support at the exact moment of need, recognizing that resistance is often just a plea for a safety net.
And conversely, to avoid stalling the very innovation they claim to want, leaders must stop letting their risk avoidance processes overtake their core purpose. They have to recognize the difference between a guardrail and a roadblock.
It's all about finding that balance.
It really is. The text leaves us with a profound reminder about the nature of systems themselves. The exact same institutional structures, the governance committees, the IT protocols, the compliance reviews, they can either act as a straitjacket that immobilizes an organization, or they can act as a harness that empowers people to take risks safely.
Oh, I like that. A harness versus a straitjacket.
Yeah. The difference doesn't lie in the existence of the rules. The difference is entirely in how intentionally those systems are designed to balance risk with progress.
It's all in the design. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with today. Think back to that committee room we talked about earlier, the one slowly suffocating a good idea by demanding it be perfectly scalable on day one.
The graveyard of ideas.
Right. If innovation, especially something as paradigm-shifting and accessible as AI, is already spreading organically outside of formal campus systems, Well, is the greatest risk to an institution no longer that they might accidentally adopt a flawed tool?
That's a great question.
Is the true danger now that their hyper-cautious, slow-moving approval processes will render them completely disconnected from how real learning is actually happening in the world? It's something to mull over the next time you find yourself sitting in a meeting, just watching a good idea wait for permission to exist. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.